The foot that made that print is about 10 times the size of a normal man's.
What happens to our world if massive, monstrous man-beasts like this invade us? Flown a captive to a West Coast metropolis in an Army cargo plane, his arrival catapults the whole city into an ocean of fear. For this colossal beast is at war with the world, our world, a world his savage instincts can only hate.
The colossal man is loose in Los Angeles.
Look at the giant!
Panic grips the civilized world in blood-freezing horror as the immeasurable power of this colossal beast threatens a war of brutality such as we've never known.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're gonna catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Thank you for joining us on the American International Podcast. I'm Jeff Parkin.
I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And today we're revisiting an old friend as Glenn Manning returns in the secret sequel, War of the Colossal Beast from 1958.
War of the Colossal Beast was directed by Bert I. Gordon, written by George Worthing Yeats from a story by Bert I. Gordon, and produced by Bert I. Gordon for Carmel Productions.
War of the Colossal Beast stars Sally Fraser as Joyce Manning, Roger Pace as Major Mark Baird, Dean Parkin as Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Manning / the Colossal Man, Russ Bender as Dr. Carmichael, Rico Alaniz as Sergeant Luis Murillo, George Becwar as John Swanson, Robert Hernandez as Miguel.
It also stars Charles Stewart as Captain Harris, June Jocelyn as Mrs. Edwards, John McNamara as the Neurologist, Loretta Nicholson as Joan, Raymond Winston as Arthur Lang, Jack Kosslyn as the Newscaster, and George Navarro as the Mexican doctor.
War of the Colossal Beast begins with a truck racing through the desert. The bed looks empty, but we will later learn that it's full of groceries.
It's also set to the bombastic score by Albert Glasser.
The driver of this truck keeps glancing back frantically, so it appears he's being chased.
Not that we see anything.
On one of his looks behind him, he somehow drives his truck into a pool of water.
Pretty shallow pool. Maybe it's a lake.
He scrambles out of the truck, continues scrambling through the water, stops, screams, and has kind of a fit. We still don't see any reason for this to be happening.
No, and it seems that all that screaming has left him little energy for walking, so he just lays there.
But during this sequence, we did have the title and the credits. So we're on to the action, and we find ourselves in Guavos, Mexico.
We're at the Delegación de Policía. A car pulls up. It bears the same Swanson's Gun Club logo that the delivery truck had on its doors. The man exiting the car is John Swanson himself. He goes inside and introduces himself to the desk sergeant. He wants to report his missing truck. Sergeant Murillo takes his complaint. The sergeant asks him to describe the truck. And John Swanson says that's a hard question to answer, but then he answers it in great detail. The truck was green, it's flatbed, it's full of groceries, so he says, punctuating it with the phrase, "Get the picture?" Swanson also tells him that the truck was being driven by a boy who he had hired to help him transport 2 vehicles down to his gun club. Eventually, Sergeant Murillo does get the picture, and he asks if maybe the truck got stuck or possibly John might have passed it on the way. Swanson gets irate. He'd recognize his own truck.
Sergeant Murillo asks for this kid's description, and Swanson gives it, and Murillo says the description matches a John Doe or a Juan Doe who had been brought into the infirmary earlier. So Murillo and Swanson head across the street to see if Swanson can ID this kid. Swanson sees the guy in the bed and immediately IDs him, says, "That's him." And then Swanson starts shaking him. "Where's my truck?" Sergeant Murillo pulls Swanson off the patient, then consults with the doctor in Spanish. The patient's name is Miguel, and he is suffering from shock. From what? They cannot say. But Swanson isn't satisfied with his diagnosis. "What did you do with my truck?"
The sergeant questions Miguel more gently and in Spanish. Miguel tries to say what happened, but words fail him, and then he kind of passes out again. The doctor says that he will notify them when Miguel is well enough to talk, and the sergeant offers to take Swanson to where the boy was found. They drive out to the lake and get out to look around. Swanson IDs the tire tracks as his. He recognizes the new treads. And they lead to the water, where they just stop. The sergeant speculates that the truck went up somehow. Swanson growls that the truck had many nice features, but wings weren't one of them. He demands that the sergeant find his truck, but Sergeant Murillo says that vanished vehicles are outside the scope of his duties. For once, Swanson has no reply.
Now we're in Los Angeles, specifically the Beverly Hilton.
Swanky.
Where Joyce Manning is watching the news. The international news is finished, so now it's time for something a little lighter. It turns out that John Swanson's truck has disappeared, and he's fighting with his insurance company over the claim. Slow news day.
I guess.
As the reporter starts on the next story about teacher salaries, Joyce picks up the phone and tells the operator to make a person-to-person call to John Swanson. She'll hold the line.
And somehow the volume mysteriously goes down during this conversation. I guess she had a remote. The next thing we know, John Swanson is in Joyce's hotel room, ranting about his missing truck. Joyce hands him a drink to shut him up, and then we hear the door buzzer. There's a man at the door. He introduces himself as Major Baird, and we find out why everyone is there. Joyce is interested in the truck. She and Baird want to know if Swanson saw anything else at the site where it disappeared. Animal tracks? Huh? He says. Human tracks? There were Miguel's, he says. Baird says no, these would be the tracks of a really big man, but Swanson does not get the picture. So Major Baird tells him that they're looking for something 10 times the size of a normal man. He gets, but does not like this picture.
Swanson thinks she's putting him on, and Major Baird elaborates that Joyce is under the impression that her brother, who had suffered a dose of radiation from an atomic bomb and had grown to colossal size, might somehow be involved. Swanson recognizes the story as that of Colonel Glenn Manning, but wasn't he killed by military fire and falling off the Hoover Dam into the Colorado River? Major Baird says that Joyce is under the impression that her brother might be responsible for the disappearance of his truck. Talk about grasping at straws. But Swanson doesn't want any part of this. He's already having a difficult time with the insurance company without talking about giants returning from the dead. But he does tell Joyce about Miguel down in Mexico, and maybe he can give her a lead.
Once alone with Joyce, Major Baird asks if Joyce shouldn't just give up on Glenn. The army did. She says you never found his body, but Baird counters that the river is a mile deep in places. His body is probably down there polluting the water supply of the entire Southwest right now, and it will show up in time. He states that she thinks he floated down to the Gulf of California, but that's impossible. He was on the search team, and they found no sign of him surviving, which would have been medically impossible after taking those bazooka charges and falling 700 feet. Those are the facts, and she should face them.
Joyce apologizes for bringing him out all this way for apparently no reason. He suggests that she could join him for dinner so this won't have been a wasted trip, and she says she'd like to, but she's leaving for Mexico right away. So he says goodbye and leaves before this can get any more awkward. So next we see that Joyce has arrived in Guavos, Mexico, and Sergeant Murillo is escorting her into the infirmary to see Miguel. Sergeant Murillo tells her that she may try to question him, as he is supposed to be able to speak a little English. She says Miguel's name, but he's not responsive. The sergeant suggests they try to catch Miguel later, but Joyce announces her intention to camp out in a chair in Miguel's room.
Joyce doesn't do what men want her to do. She does what Joyce wants. Since Joyce is going to spend the night in the infirmary, Sergeant Murillo volunteers his wife to cook her some dinner. That night, as Joyce sleeps on a cot next to Miguel's bed, he starts thrashing and moaning. She wakes and yells out the window, summoning the sergeant, who is apparently on duty 24/7. He comes over and sees Miguel and tells her that he doesn't understand what he's trying to say, and to call him if he speaks again. But as he turns to leave, Miguel sits upright and starts screaming. He shouts, "Or Bran," or something like that, over and over, and then he collapses.
Joyce asks what it was that Miguel had said, and Sergeant Murillo says it was something about a very big fellow or ogre. Joyce tries to ask Miguel if it was a giant man, but Miguel isn't talking anymore tonight. So now back at the Delegación de Policía, Major Baird has responded to Joyce's call. He has brought along Dr. Carmichael, the head of radiation exposure. They have a head of radiation exposure?
Yeah, not a radioactive materials study or not radiology.
Just an expert and not the head of radiation exposure.
He's the head of exposing people to radiation, I guess.
Anyway, Sergeant Murillo and Joyce take Major Baird and Dr. Carmichael to see the location where Miguel was found and the truck disappeared.
Major Baird, Joyce, Dr. Carmichael, and Sergeant Murillo caravan out to the site where the truck disappeared, and the men and Joyce survey the scene. Dr. Carmichael says it looks like the truck just vanished, but Major Baird still thinks that the evidence that Glenn is alive isn't there. Joyce reminds them of what Miguel saw, but they wave that away. But then Sergeant Murillo, who's wandered 2 feet to the left, has found a clue. It's a footprint, a big footprint. Dr. Carmichael does a little kick step over the footprint and says that it must be 10 times the size of his foot. Then he calculates that whoever made that print is 60 feet tall. Glenn was 60 feet tall, Joyce remembers.
This can't be just a coincidence.
I don't think so.
Sergeant Murillo suggests that he may have gone to those mountains over there. He says there are no people in those mountains, so it'd be a good place for a 60-foot man to hide. So they're all going to drive up there and take a look around. They'll go slowly so they can look for more footprints.
Yeah, they're not very good at spotting them.
They reach a rock formation, and Sergeant Murillo leaps out of the car. He says the ground is too rocky here for footprints, but he sees something. The others join him. Murillo has found a truck.
Well, the crumpled remains of a truck.
Joyce suggests that this must be Swanson's truck, but Sergeant Murillo shoots down that theory because Swanson's truck was green.
Not that we can tell.
This one is clearly gray.
Everything's gray.
They are distracted by a small rock slide and take cover, after which Sergeant Murillo says they should go. It's not good to be out here after dark.
In the Delegación de Policía, Senora Murillo is serving some gray meat to 3 people there. Major Baird walks in and says that he was just on the phone with the Mexican military, and they have troops and artillery just waiting for word that they spotted Glenn. Joyce wants to try to reason with Glenn to get him to come peacefully, and Dr. Carmichael thinks that Joyce might be able to get through to Glenn. But Baird isn't convinced. Joyce tells Baird that people will get hurt his way, but he doesn't care. Joyce demonstrates her signature pig-headedness and announces that she's going to find him alone and starts walking out to her car.
Baird follows her outside and tries to reason with her, but she convinces him to let her try to talk to Glenn before the trigger-happy soldiers arrive. So the Major agrees to drive Joyce back up into the mountains.
Even though it's not safe to be there after dark? As far as we know, it's dinner time.
In the mountains, Major Baird and Joyce find a truck graveyard. These trucks were to have delivered food but never made it to their destinations. Among them, they find Swanson's truck with a large thumbprint on it. Suddenly, the ground shakes and the Colossal Beast appears from behind the mountain. Major Baird holds Joyce back. The beast moans and moos like a cow, emptying the contents from the back of a truck. He doesn't find anything to his liking, so he throws the truck and ducks back behind the mountain.
At the Delegación de Policía, Sergeant Murillo is delivering loaves of bread to Dr. Carmichael. Dr. Carmichael samples the bread and finds it acceptable. He asks when the rest will be ready, and Sergeant Murillo says soon. They're already loading the truck. He gives a sample to Baird, who eats a bite and asks what's in it. Carmichael mentions the sedative that's going to be knocking Glenn out, and Baird says that he can't even taste it. I guess we'll see if he slumps down on his desk if it works. Baird tells Joyce that what they're doing is for the best. They have to bring him in for the safety of others, and it's better to do it now before he moves to a different mountain. Baird recommends that Joyce go home and asks where she lives. San Francisco, she says. He recommends she go there and wait it out, but Joyce doesn't want to fret at home. Baird says that what she needs to do is occupy herself. Does she work? She says yes. I write advertising copy for an agency. That should occupy her, says Baird. She imagines herself writing those tired old adjectives, tremendous, gigantic, colossal. Now those words only mean Glenn, the colossal freak major, and he's my brother.
Later, Major Baird joins Dr. Carmichael and Sergeant Murillo to deliver the bread. They've got it all in the back of a truck, and Carmichael is complaining to Murillo about his driving too fast, and Baird says they want the 60-foot-tall man to be able to catch them. Sergeant Murillo says he's driving just fast enough to keep ahead of the giant following them.
And they run fast because they have long legs. Speaking of legs, Glenn's appear behind the truck. Now Carmichael wants Sergeant Murillo to floor it. Glenn follows, slowly, but from what they tell us, he's getting close. They get to a clearing and park, jump out of the truck, and then hide behind a boulder to watch Glenn scarf down the all-you-can-eat breadstick special out of the back of the truck.
After scooping out and eating the truck's contents, Glenn notices the 3 men and starts off after them. They run, but the drugs have taken effect and the giant collapses. Unfortunately, he seems to collapse right on top of Sergeant Murillo.
That's kind of bad running right in front of him. He should have serpentine, run to the side.
Now we're receiving a KTLA news report. It seems that news of Colonel Glenn Manning's death had been greatly exaggerated. He was captured today in Mexico and will be transported back to the U.S. A congressman, being interviewed by the press, says that they have nothing but gratitude for the Mexican nation for their cooperation and to Major Baird for his quick actions.
The reporter asks what Congress is going to do about Glenn Manning.
And then we see kind of a montage of the buck being passed to different departments within the government. First, we see the Department of Medical Research, and they say they can't accept the responsibility of feeding, cleaning, and diapering a 60-foot man.
They want the Department of Health and Welfare. Yeah, that's the ticket. But the head of Health and Welfare says that's outside of the scope of their appropriations. This is a matter for Congress. And now we're back to the congressman on the phone. He's baffled as to why he's getting called on this. He recommends the caller try the Pentagon.
Now the plane containing the amazing Colossal Man is circling LAX, but the mayor won't allow the plane to land. Major Baird says the plane only has 5 minutes of fuel left, then it's coming down one way or another. The mayor says they have no place to keep a 60-foot man, even temporarily. All of the warehouses are located in the heart of the city, and should something go wrong, that would certainly hurt his chances of re-election. But perhaps the Hollywood Bowl.
He can't play the Hollywood Bowl for his first gig.
But the major doesn't want to expose him to the weather. I'm not sure what Glenn's been doing about the weather for the past year.
I know. And why is he not being taken to a military facility? That's what they did the first time around. The mayor is hereby out of ideas. Baird looks over his shoulder and spots a hangar and says that'll work. But the mayor says, no way. LAX is a major transportation hub and he can't allow a giant-sized maniac to run amok there.
How would a maniac wrecking havoc from the Hollywood Bowl be any better?
Nobody's really thinking this through. Baird gives his word that nothing bad will happen because they'll not keep him there a minute longer than necessary. The mayor caves and the plane is instructed to land. And then later we see Glenn on a giant Serta mattress, bound in ropes, and really unhappy about that. A bunch of soldiers are milling about, and he moves at them.
Joyce shows up at the airport and asks of Major Baird why Glenn's being kept at the airport. She says he should be at the hospital receiving treatment. They don't make hospitals that big, Joyce, quips Baird. Anyway, this is only temporary until Congress decides what to do with him.
Joyce asks, why can't they give him that drug from the first movie? It made him stop growing. But Baird says that only stopped his growth. It didn't reverse it. Joyce complains they can't keep him there like some kind of cattle. But Baird says the world doesn't see a 60-foot man the way his sister does.
Short time later, Carmichael and Baird are down in the hangar discussing the Colossal Man. Dr. Carmichael asks if he need be tied down, and Major Baird says that if he could be trusted, he could be given a little more freedom. So Dr. Carmichael calls out to him, Glenn Manning, Glenn Manning. And Major Baird says, see, no response.
Did he even hear their puny voices? On his mattress, Glenn is writhing in agony. Then someone, maybe Glenn, dreams an extended flashback scene that encompasses the highlights of the amazing Colossal Man.
We see Glenn receive his dosage of radiation from the atomic bomb. We see that he doesn't want to grow anymore. He's stuck with a giant needle, and then he's shot at Hoover Dam.
There's a little bit more. But made me wonder, why didn't they take him back to Nevada to the base where they had him the first time? I bet they still have his smelly old mattress.
Suddenly, the Colossal Man begins breaking the ropes that are holding him down.
Rather easily.
The military men try to secure him with more rope, but the Colossal Man escapes and crawls out of the hangar.
They tried to lasso him. Like a cow.
Major Baird commands the men to lure him away from the planes with tear gas. Carmichael says anesthesia will be better, and Baird tells Carmichael to go get some.
Joyce runs up to Baird sobbing. What are you going to do? Baird says he doesn't know, but he can't just let him out there amongst a million people. Joyce declares that he's going to kill Glenn, and Baird admits he will if he has to. He's responsible for all the lives Glenn could take. Baird orders a sergeant to take Joyce back to her hotel.
Glenn walks over to the airport's control tower to terrorize the operator.
At least she's not in a bathtub.
The military begins shooting, and Baird orders all jets into the air.
Over at the TWA building, one soldier is firing heavier artillery. It actually has a sedative attached. And Glenn at last goes down.
Once again, the Colossal Man is laying on his mattress, secured in the hangar, only this time he's secured by chains instead of rope. He's also receiving a transfusion from a very large blood bag.
Looks like a big garbage bag.
The mayor comes by to check up on things. That incident earlier was exactly as he'd feared.
City council is up in arms.
But the mayor is assured that extra precautions have been taken, and he's too weak right now to try to escape.
I don't believe this guy. Why should anybody?
But the mayor seems assured by this. But he still wants to know how long they plan to keep him here. The major suggests they ask Dr. Carmichael.
Dr. Carmichael says that depends on whether his brain functions. If so, he can be helped. Maybe it's shell shock, amnesia, what have you. If not, he'll be a psychopathic case and a menace until the day he dies. I don't think that's the definition of psychopathy. This movie is not very scientifically accurate. The general orders that the tests be started as soon as possible. The results will tell them what to do.
Next, we see Joyce on the phone with the Red Cross trying to order 10 gallons of plasma. They're giving her a hard time because they've sent so much already. Major Baird takes the phone and assures them they'll get back all the blood they've used.
How? Gonna drain Glenn later?
So Joyce is asking for plasma, Baird is asking for blood. Those are two different things.
Continuity, not a big issue with the script.
Joyce thanks Major Baird for his help, and Baird tells her that she looks tired and sends her home. Only this time, he'll see her to the door himself. They exit the hangar, leaving the colossal man struggling with his chains.
The next day, Dr. Carmichael explains an EEG to Joyce. They're trying to discover if he has curable amnesia or not. They wheel the machine out to the hangar. A doctor in a bucket truck lift is finishing an examination on a sleeping Glenn. They have mounted a viewing screen above him so that he can see pictures? Movies? The doctor gets out of the bucket and comes over to Carmichael, who wants to know what caused Glenn's face to get so messed up. The doctor speculates that an injury followed by an infection was the problem. He is missing an entire eyeball, so we don't know what happened to that. That injury could have caused amnesia, but Glenn's nervous responses are more indicative of brain trauma.
But this test will confirm that one way or the other. The test begins and a picture is projected on the screen. Glenn Manning, look at the picture. Do you recognize it? It's where you went to college.
It's just a generic college picture.
They put up another picture. Glenn Manning, look at this one. It's the ship that brought you back to the States after your tour of duty in Korea. What about this one, Glenn Manning? Do you recognize this face? This is your face.
It's a very shallow test. They're not trying very hard. They don't have pictures of his loved ones. They don't have pictures of personal things, a college, a ship, him. I mean, that might trigger something, but the other ones?
They didn't trigger anything, and the doctors decide that there is no significant response.
They give up.
But Joyce wants to try. You must remember, Glenn. Try. Remember our childhood? Your first bicycle was red and it had a bell on it. Remember? Remember your prom? You must remember, Glenn. Please, Glenn. Please, try to remember. But Glenn is just agitated.
I would be too. She's kind of a nag. Glenn responds to Joyce's nagging by tearing at his chains. A newspaper headline announces that Glenn has failed his last chance. I didn't try very hard. Baird and Carmichael are talking. Carmichael asks Baird if he got his orders. Yep, Glenn is going to be taken to a Navy ship and then transported to an island 60 miles off the coast. It's going to take all night to get him ready. Dr. Carmichael asks if Joyce has been told about this, and Baird says no. Carmichael says, you better do it. Sooner the better. She's at the hotel. Baird says he's going to go do that, and he'll be back in half an hour, though he's not giving her a lot of time to process this.
So Baird meets Joyce at her hotel. He tries to convince her that this is the best thing for everyone. Glenn will be safe, and he'll be unable to harm others, and food will be dropped for him at regular intervals. Joyce still isn't thrilled with his plan, but she can offer nothing better.
60 miles doesn't seem far enough. Like, people might still boat out there and find him.
Back at the hangar, Glenn has started snapping his chains. Carmichael hears the sound and grabs a flashlight. He shines it on Glenn's face, and Glenn appears to be asleep, so Carmichael puts back the flashlight. Once Carmichael's gone, Glenn continues working on his chains.
It doesn't take long before he shrugs them off. In Joyce's room, Joyce says she wants to come with Glenn, which Baird says he's already anticipated, and that's arranged. Joyce thanks Baird for all his help. Then the phone rings. It's for Major Baird. Glenn has escaped. Wow, who could have predicted that? And Dr. Carmichael is dead.
So the search is on for a 60-foot man in Los Angeles. The police haven't had any reports. Where could he be?
They put out an APB for a guy who can't be missed, and yet they're still missing him.
So we were talking about this, and really the only place they could hide in Los Angeles would be Griffith Park, right?
Yeah, you predicted it, and, well, there he was.
And that's where he was spotted, Griffith Park. Baird is commanding the troops via phone. He tells them to surround the area and contain him, but not to open fire until the area is secured from all civilians, and then only if necessary.
They also want them to block off all access roads, and they're involving the police. The cops are sending their men into action. KTLA reports what's happening and warns civilians to stay away, as it will impede the military's ability to capture Glenn. Oh, but they're sending a truck up there because the rules don't apply to them. They've got to bring everyone the latest on this breaking story.
We see that there is a school field trip underway at the Griffith Observatory. A police car drives up and tells the bus driver that he needs to get out of there. The giant man is on the loose. But the driver tells the policeman that he can't go without his payload, meaning the teacher and students, and he motions for the teacher and students to get on the bus. They gots to go.
Baird is there, and he gets on the radio asking all units to put their spotlights on, but nothing is illuminated. The news crew is in position and is broadcasting live. Troops are moving past them, and a crowd is gathered around the KTLA truck, and the announcer states the obvious. Spotlights are sweeping right, now left, but they're not seeing anything. However, one of the lights catches Glenn's eye. We see him, but nobody else does. Glenn gets angry, and he skulks away.
The teacher has loaded all the students on the bus, except two seem to be missing, Arthur and Lori. She calls out for them, but they're too busy looking at the crowd below and wondering what all the commotion is about. I'm sure it's much more interesting watching from up here than being part of the crowd.
Or watching on KTLA.
The KTLA reporter asks the police officer how things are going, and the officer says the civilians are being cooperative and are not congesting the roadways to and from Griffith Park.
The reporter asks if the public has been evacuated from the area, and the cop says, yep, but we know better. There's still kids up there. Seconds later, a woman comes up to the police officer and introduces herself. She's Mrs. Edwards. She's asking about the bus at the observatory with the kids on it. The police officer repeats that there's no one there, but Mrs. Edwards knows better. She insists that's not possible. She hasn't seen her Lori yet. The cop says he's going to go check on that.
He returns after a moment and says that the bus is still there and it's presently safe, so there's nothing to worry about. Mrs. Edwards asked if she might go through to pick up Lori, but the officer would prefer she wait with the crowd.
But her coat. She's going to be cold without her coat, and she forgot to remind her to take it this morning. Still no dice.
At the observatory, the teacher calls out again for Arthur and Lori, and this time Arthur and Lori figure they'd better listen. As they're boarding the bus, Arthur cries out, "Look, a giant!" And sure enough, Glenn is wandering down a road past some electrical poles. He bats at one, and it sparks. Then he walks over toward the observatory.
He's about twice the size of the observatory standing behind it. So I guess the observatory is 30 feet tall.
All the spotlights are shining on him now. Major Baird is shouting through a megaphone for Glenn to give up or be destroyed.
The spotlight enrages Glenn, and he picks up the bus full of screaming children, tilting it left and right. Mrs. Edwards sobs into Lori's coat and says someone should do something. So, of course, Joyce is the one to do something. She hijacks a Jeep and drives up to within shouting distance of Glenn. She tells him to think. Think. And eventually he thinks of putting the bus down.
He reaches down for Joyce, then retracts his hand. He whispers, "Joyce!" and then, putting his face in his hands, sombers off.
He shuffles over to those power lines and starts twanging them, and sparks fly.
In a burst of color, the amazing colossal man is electrocuted and then evaporates.
Before our very eyes. And that's the end.
You're listening to the American International Podcast, and we're discussing War of the Colossal Beast from 1958.
The working titles for this film were Revenge of the Colossal Man and The Colossal Beast, but it was ultimately titled War of the Colossal Beast, another title chosen by Nicholson. And as we said, it was a sequel to The Amazing Colossal Man, which starred Glenn Langan as Colonel Glenn Manning. 3 actors appeared in both The Amazing Colossal Man and War of the Colossal Beast, all playing different characters in each. Russ Bender was Dr. Carmichael in Beast and Richard Kingman in Amazing. Jocelyn, Mrs. Edwards in this film, was Nurse Wilson in The Amazing Colossal Man, and Jack Kosslyn played a newscaster in War of the Colossal Beast and a lieutenant in The Amazing Colossal Man. Although in The Amazing Colossal Man, Glenn's fiancée states that Glenn has no family, in War of the Colossal Beast, Glenn has a sister, Joyce, and his fiancée is not mentioned. Filming of War of the Colossal Beast took place at Griffith Park Observatory in Los Angeles, along with some other locations. In the black and white film's closing moments, when Glenn is electrocuted, the film changes to color. The original 16mm U.S. television syndication prints had the color finale printed in black and white, though.
Several scenes from the earlier picture appear in War of the Colossal Beast, despite the role of Glenn being played by different actors in each film. The producers decided to use obscuring makeup designed by Jack Young on Dean Parkin as a way to disguise the fact that a different actor was playing Colonel Manning, especially since a dream sequence flashing back to the original film featured Glenn Langan, the star of the earlier film. Young was the artist who designed Margaret Hamilton's makeup in The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, that's cool. Young also did Parkin's makeup in Gordon's 1957 feature Cyclops, which was the only other acting role Parkin, a stuntman, played in his career.
War of the Colossal Beast was released on June 30th, 1958, as the second feature on a double bill with Attack of the Puppet People, also a Bert I. Gordon production.
AIP's press book advised theater owners to play up the little versus big distinction in the double bill of Attack of the Puppet People and War of the Colossal Beast, suggesting a department store window display of a group of dolls taking on some mannequins, with the theater information between the two groups.
Taglines for War of the Colossal Beast include Towering Terror from Hell.
See the Colossal Beast destroyed in color.
War of the Colossal Beast debuted as the 34th highest box office draw the weekend of its debut, just behind Attack of the Puppet People, taking in $20,000 in the 2 cities it played in.
I couldn't find out anything else in terms of box office, though. In a trade magazine ad published in 1958, AIP's PR person said that Attack of the Puppet People and War of the Colossal Beast ranked among its successful summer films, topping all big company grosses in a Los Angeles multiple first run. So I guess it did pretty good.
The Monthly Film Bulletin wrote, the trick photography of these further adventures of the amazing Colossal Man is ludicrously unconvincing, and in any case, the idea has lost its pristine impact. The dialogue strikes an oddly hieratic note. The charmed school heroine reacts to every plot development with a winsome smile, while the rest of the players apparently prefer not to react at all.
War of the Colossal Beast was featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000 in its 3rd season in 1991, about 10 episodes after The Amazing Colossal Man was featured.
Well, this was kind of a fun one for me to revisit because it's probably been 25, 30 years since I've seen War of the Colossal Beast.
Really? Oh, wow. I don't know if I'd call it fun. I thought this movie was kind of maddening. When we were doing the synopsis, we kind of covered some major plot holes, choices that the characters made that made no sense, and just some of the stupid dialogue that made me think that this was kind of thrown together haphazardly without a lot of care. And I'm sure that's true.
Well, we do get that because this was a sequel, but it wasn't really marketed as being a sequel. In the introduction, I said that it was a secret sequel, and it really kind of was.
Well, due to the title change, I mean, the title itself made no sense. War of the Colossal Beast? Who's he at war with? Himself?
The war might be kind of an exaggeration, but I can see calling him a beast because, at least for most of this film, he's a mindless hulk.
Yeah, he does no dialogue. He has one word that he says. He's not a person like Glenn Manning was in The Amazing Colossal Man. And I think the movie really suffers for that. He's just this 60-foot problem that everyone has to deal with. Joyce is the only person who sees him as a human being.
Right. The Amazing Colossal Man was a really good movie. I gave it an A. You didn't like it as much as I did. But I just saw it as such a tragic story.
Yeah, it was. Because we got to see the perspective of a man who didn't want to grow anymore. And there was nothing he could do. He was this ungainly size. They said he was probably going to die because his heart was going to fail, killing him. He really had nothing to look forward to but this horrible life.
And plus, Glenn Langan was a really good actor, and he really elevated the film beyond where it deserved to be.
Right. I mean, this is a giant man in a big diaper, and yet we still take him seriously and feel for him. However, this Glenn in War of the Colossal Beast, he's just annoying. He's an obstacle that has to be dealt with. It seemed like the most humane thing to do would be to kill him.
Well, as a mindless creature, all he does is moan and moo like a cow.
But I thought the efforts that they made to reach him were very limited. They didn't try very hard. Like with the slideshow, if I saw one picture of my university and one picture of a ship I was on one time, that wouldn't trigger anything in me. It wouldn't return me from amnesia. Show me pictures of the person I was in love with, or my mother, my father, brothers and sisters. Show me those. They could have showed him a picture of Joyce. She's right there, but he can't see her. But a big close-up of her face might trigger something. Grab his yearbook, show a picture of his prom date, something that actually was from a time. His fiancée. They just put no effort into him.
Well, Joyce did try to get him to remember his prom.
But they didn't use any pictures. Could he even hear them? Their tiny little voices from 20 feet away while he's groaning and mooing at them?
Well, the one picture they did use was a picture of him, allegedly. I assume it was a picture of Glenn Langan, but it didn't look like him. That wasn't a good picture.
No, it wasn't.
And would you recognize a picture of yourself? Because you probably see yourself less than anybody else in your life.
And a profile, too. Well, I hate my profile, so I'd probably get triggered by that. There weren't very many likable characters in this movie at all. We're supposed to be on Joyce's side, but eventually I got annoyed with her. She's always doing what she wants and not listening to the authorities. Although it's really their fault he got away, not hers. It just kind of bothered me. Normally I like a take charge heroine, but she just got on my nerves.
And that was Sally Fraser, who we last saw in It Conquered the World, when she was Peter Graves' wife and he had to shoot her because she threw a bat at him. And I thought she was better in that movie than this one. but that might be a matter of the script and not a judgment of her performance at all.
No, I think the script is mainly to blame for everything here. It gives Glenn nothing to do. It makes the military and the scientists look kind of stupid. And it just makes Joyce an irritant.
One of the cool things about The Amazing Colossal Man, I thought, was the amount of miniature props that were used. Mm-hmm. And we don't see that here. We see a large blood bag, and we had a large syringe in the first one. And I guess it's a large mattress, but that's not going to really impress anybody. But in the original, there were chairs, and there was a phone, and there was that little Bible he's thumbing through. And I don't think they were actually to scale to each other.
No.
But the props seemed to be well built, and it was fun to see them. And there was nothing like that in this. He picks up a bus, but that doesn't even look like it's the right scale.
No, it doesn't. It's his shoulder width.
So I think it's disappointing that the first movie was such a tragedy, and this one is just a monster movie.
Right.
It's a monster on a rampage, kind of. He's not on much of a rampage. He's just looking for trucks to scoop the food out of the back, but
not really hurting anybody then.
Well, it's a nuisance, and something's got to be done about it.
Right.
Because those trucks were supposed to go somewhere.
But then they brought him to where he could be a really big nuisance in the middle of Los Angeles. That made no sense. All kinds of military bases in the desert where he would be isolated.
Well, if they had made it to the island like their plan was, everything probably would have been okay.
Well, it depends on the island and can he swim? Could he swim back to shore? I don't know. It reminded me of the Jurassic Park movie where they brought all the dinosaurs to LA and then were like super shocked when they started running around eating people's dogs out of their backyards. Like, think it through. It's obvious what's going to happen. The special effects of Glenn were better in this one, though. There was no like transparent projection issues in this movie. So that improved over the past year. He wasn't partially visible most of the time.
Right. You could still kind of see the outline, but it wasn't as distracting as the first film.
Right. Really bad green screen, I guess you could call it. And that's the only positive thing I have to say about this movie.
Well, I could say positively that even if it does it badly, it continues the story of Glenn Manning.
It just doesn't continue it in a direction that we really want to go. So is that better than not knowing it all?
Maybe, but I was satisfied with the ending of The Amazing Colossal Man. And so this probably was a story that didn't need to be told.
No, I don't think so. It smacks of a shameless cash grab by AIP.
But you would think that they would have promoted this as being a sequel to their hit, The Amazing Colossal Man, if that were the case. But
yeah, and there should have been more continuity between the two movies, including 3 actors that were in both movies, but as different characters. Like Russ Bender had a largest role, didn't he, in Amazing Colossal Man? And he's an entirely different person here a year later.
Well, that's not uncommon for movies of this period and even into the 60s.
Right. Did he get killed in the first movie?
I don't remember him in the first movie.
Well, he definitely got killed in this one.
I remember him in Invasion of the Saucer Men, and he only had one line.
Well, there just could have been more continuity. I'm sure Kathy Downs didn't want to come back as Glenn's poor fiance, but...
And we know Glenn Langan wouldn't wanted to come back for this role. I would have been embarrassed to even ask him to be in this one.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure he wouldn't have touched it with a 60-foot pole. His agent wouldn't even let that call go through. It's just really disappointing all around. There's so many other directions this could have gone, and they chose this. And maybe we have to lay that at Bert I. Gordon's feet and not AIP's, because he was responsible for virtually everything about this movie, from the script to the effects to the direction. It's not one of his better movies.
Now, my favorite Bert I. Gordon movies aren't even AIP. If I was listing my top 3, it'd be Tormented, The Magic Sword, and The Boy and the Pirates. And none of those are AIP.
Well, he and AIP had sort of a problematic relationship. And after Attack of the Puppet People and this movie came out, he actually sued them because, and we talked about this on a previous podcast, he was convinced that they were absconding with some of his residuals. And that's probably true. By putting themselves as producers of the film, they got to take a cut off the top, even though they did nothing. They didn't even promote it very well. And I don't think we ever found out how that suit played out or if they just settled it. But we definitely don't have a dollar amount.
No, but we know it's nearly 20 years later before Bert I. Gordon did anything with the AIP again.
So eventually they buried the hatchet. That's a long stretch with no cooperation. Even Roger Corman didn't get sick of him that fast. I'm certain he had grounds for it. I do think, as much as we question them using Los Angeles as a location, it probably provided the only point of interest in the movie was that scene at Griffith Park. Other than that, it's all in a hangar or against a mountain. It's pretty dull location-wise until we get to there. So I guess I see why they illogically chose to have Glenn end up there.
Right. Plot-wise, it would have made more sense, as we said, to bring them back to a military base in Nevada somewhere.
The desert.
But that would have just been the first film played over again. This gave us something a little different with this location.
But not until the very end, though. So up until then, it was kind of same old, same old.
And I don't think the climax was as exciting as being shot off the Hoover Dam to have him commit suicide by touching electrical wires, even though it went into color, which was exciting, I guess.
Maybe.
And then he just dissolved. He just disappeared.
Right.
Which makes cleanup a lot easier, I guess.
Yep. When I die, I just want to blink out of frame the same way Glenn did.
So what about the makeup use? We said that it was primarily a tool to help disguise that this wasn't Glenn Langan playing the part. And I don't know if this was because of the title or not, but it also gave more of a reason to call him a beast instead of a man.
Right. The makeup they put on his face was sort of like a partial skull piece with an empty eye socket and exposed jaw. And it was pretty shocking to see that.
It's pretty well done. When we first see him, when he comes from behind that mountain, it wasn't a jump scare, but I actually felt a little anxiety, which kind of surprised me because, you know, I'm a 53-year-old man and this is a 60-some-year-old movie.
Right.
So I was kind of surprised that it gave me that feeling.
I don't know that I felt that, but
Well, you wouldn't, because I think it was very abnormal that I did.
But I do think that it was effective as a tool for why all these people were freaking out, or at least the few people that actually saw him. So if that was chasing me and my food truck down the road, I'd probably be screaming too. I don't know if I would just flop around in a puddle of water like Miguel did, but I'd definitely be terrified.
Yeah, it's things that scare you in context. Like if I'm driving down the road and there's a clown in the car behind me, that's a little disconcerting.
No, that's very disconcerting.
I'm not generally afraid of clowns, but that's happened, and it's kind of a strange feeling to find yourself in that position.
I passed one on the road and I started shivering. It was so scary. I've seen people I know in clown costumes and my skin started to crawl. I had to step away. So yeah, that was probably the best part of the movie. The most effective thing that Bert I. Gordon did was hiring the makeup artist that he did. Nothing else he did really makes me think that he put a lot of effort into this movie.
I will mention that the poster for War of the Colossal Beast is 10 times greater than the Amazing Colossal Man poster.
Oh, it is. It's very distinctive and it stands out a lot more. You just have this giant man with half a face holding a school bus. His expression is of rage and it looks kind of scary.
And there's people tumbling out of the school bus, which is scary.
Oh, yeah. Temporarily, anyway. Eventually you land. But yeah, there's not a lot going for this movie.
So how are you going to rate War of the Colossal Beast using our AIP scale where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic?
Well, first I want to give a retrograde A to The Amazing Colossal Man. I know I didn't rate it as high as you did, and now I regret that because it's clearly superior. As for this movie, I can't really do better than a P. You know, I don't like giving Ps, but usually I do that when a movie makes me angry. Maybe I feel really gross for having watched it. This one just annoyed me, and it annoyed me to the point where I can't give it even an intermediate. What do you think?
So you're giving Amazing Colossal Man an A now because it wasn't as bad as this one?
Sometimes your feelings mellow over time and change, and I can see that I was wrong. It's been a year. I've reflected. I've grown as a person.
Well, we've seen a lot of bad movies since then.
Yeah, we have. And in the hierarchy of movies that we've seen, it's actually better than I gave it credit for.
Good to see you've come around. I don't think this is a bad movie. It's definitely got its problems. It seems like it was a forced story. It was a story that didn't need to be told.
It could have been told much better.
The character of Joyce is kind of just annoying. She just runs around and complains that nobody's trying to help her. And every time she threatens to help herself, somebody says, okay, and then gives in. But nothing actually gets done that's helpful to her or Glenn.
Nope.
So in a way, this feels like it's an exploitation movie exploiting the one that came before it. So maybe it's good that they didn't really market this as being a sequel. In the commentary on the Blu-ray, Donald Glut talks about how he was in the theater and realized it was a sequel while he was watching it. And he felt smarter than everybody else in the room because he was sure he was the only one who figured that out. I don't know if that would actually be the case, but it should have been a surprise to anybody in that room.
No, I mean, just from the poster art, basically the same guy. Diaper's the same.
Well, he's missing half his face. And it's a different cast. Maybe if it was the same cat, maybe that's why they didn't promote it, was because there were no returning characters.
Right.
Anyway, I don't think it's a bad movie. I thought it was fun. There was a lot of issues with it, as I said, and there was a lot of problems with the logic. But that often makes these a lot more fun for me to watch, is when they're just defying logic at every turn.
God, that drives me crazy. They're supposed to be scientists and military people.
As long as they're consistent with the science, no matter how little sense it makes, I'm okay with it.
Okay. Were they consistent?
Well, they were consistently just tying this guy down and he kept getting up.
They're consistently ineffectual.
If you compare it to the first movie, it's very inconsistent because that serum that they were supposed to inject into him that they did was supposed to reverse the process. And it did reverse the process in the animals they tested. It did stop his growth, but it didn't return him back to normal size. Plus, they had the whole heart problem that he was supposed to have, and that didn't continue.
What if he's a totally different giant in this movie? And that's why he didn't remember anything from his past life. He didn't recognize Joyce. And they couldn't reverse his growth because maybe he's just naturally big. He didn't recognize his name. They kept calling him Glenn
because
Langan.
He said Joyce at the end and he had a flashback.
Because she introduced herself so many times.
She never said it's Joyce.
They never called her Joyce in front of him?
Probably not that he could hear. She never said, it's Joyce. It's your sister, Joyce. She just kept saying, Glenn, remember.
I don't know. I'm just saying that might explain how he doesn't remember anything.
She's just kind of a nag. But anyway, I'm going to give this one an I. It's not one that I'm going to go back and revisit a lot, but I can see myself watching this one again.
And that's the bar?
Yeah, pretty much. Just to see the continuing adventures of Glenn Manning.
Well, you'll be watching it without me.
And with that, I feel that another episode of the American International Podcast has come to an end.
Fallen off the dam, as it were. We're blinked out of existence.
I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.